Hi, my name is Court Wing, and this is REMAP Therapeutics. So in the history of clinical research of psychedelics and chronic pain, often the 1964 study by Eric Kast is cited as the first intervention. But it appears after a bit of research that was not the first clinical study of psychedelics ameliorating chronic pain in the modern era. That distinction seems to go to a team from both Kobe Medical School and Kyoto University. The name of that paper was The Effect of LSD-25 on the Phamtomlimb. The authors from the Kobe Medical School were Kuromaru, the lead author, Okada and Hanada, and from Kyoto we have Kasahara and Sakamoto. That study was in fact actually started in 1958. It dealt with 8 patients, 6 of whom had a limb removed, 2 of whom had one type of stroke or another, and all were suffering from phantom-limb phenomena as well as phantom-limb pain. Once LSD-25 was applied, approximately 25% of them went into instant remission, with the majority of the phantom-limb sensation disappearing completely, as well as phantom-limb pain itself. Crucially, what's just incredibly fascinating is how much they forecast the mechanisms of action that would be involved. So this was published in the Journal of the Japanese Society for the Study of Psychiatry and Neurology, right? Japan has lots of societies. It's a thing that goes way back to the Meiji era. Fascinatingly, they correctly forecast that this would involve what's known as the body scheme, or the body schema, as they referred to it at the time. In our modern parlance, we would be referring to that as homuncular representations all throughout the cortex, right? So you have these kind of classic graphics of the body. I'm sure you've seen pictures of homuncular man before, where their head is gigantic with massive lips and nose and eyes, and then relatively small body with very big hands and maybe slightly bigger feet. But it's a way of showing how much cortical area is devoted to the sensation and motor outputs for any given anatomical area within the body, and how that's mapped on the cortex. So they're referring to the body schema, as it was termed at the time, and they correctly summarized that phantom limb pain is a cortical misrepresentation or maladaptation. That it is a maladaptive cortical representation of a limb that no longer exists or has suffered what is known as deafferentation, right? Afferent input is signals coming from the limbs and the body and working its way upward into the central nervous system, the CNS. Efferents are outputs of the brain. Think efferent equals effervescent, right? That's the direction it's going. It's effervescent, it's bubbling out, right? Anyways, so we have these maladaptive afferent inputs, right? There's no longer a limb or afferent inputs coming in, so we have this deafferentation. So they believe this was a malfunction, a dysfunction within the body scheme to record that loss of limb. So from a survival context, from what's known as the threat neuromatrix concept for how pain is happening, often termed as the biopsychosocial model, right? Your body has two main goals. Your cortical output is mainly threat prediction and movement, right? There's a lot in the neurology of that's been developed over the last decade and a half in pain research that fascinatingly coincides with a lot of psychedelic research, all brought on by the neuroimaging revolution that we've been going through. Anyways, when you're talking about deafferentation in a survival evolutionary context, the loss of limb sensation is an existential threat. It either means you've lost the limb and you're experiencing severe blood loss, exsanguination, right? So you're about to bleed out, or if that limb is no longer working, that's a loss of your ability to transport yourself. So locomotion is compromised. Obviously, it's a risk for infection, your ability to get food, carry things, all of those. So it's a very severe survival risk. So when that happens, and there's that loss of sensation, that deafferentation, it's the highest priority. But when you don't die from it, it's still an ongoing threat, even though the wound healing has ceased. You know, it's resolved, it's complete, you're not going to die, but your nervous system doesn't know that. So they summarized or surmised that it was a type of hallucination, right? And at the time, LSD was thought of as what was known as a psychotomimeticist, right? It was a drug that would mimic the effects of psychosis, right? So psychosis is often characterized by delusions, right? Hallucinations, right? So they thought this was a type of auto-generated hallucination. So it's not a cognitive distortion in the classic sense when we think of psychosis, but it's a sort of a body schema hallucination, right? So they believed that LSD, when it was released to the medical community in the late 40s and going into the 50s, might possibly resolve this cognitive distortion, this deafferentation. But interestingly, two main things about this study and the results they got, it's just remarkable. One, they correctly summarized about the homuncular representations in the body schema, and just like throughout all the structures in your brain, you have multiple maps for your anatomy distributed, right? They're all kind of checking the integrity of what's going on in each of those anatomical structures, and comparing motor plans and autonomic responses within those systems. It's constantly updating and refreshing, right? And they believe that distortion is happening there, but also they thought it would be better to use low dose LSD. So typical dose where we start seeing so-called psychedelic effects happens at 100 micrograms and above, right? They thought for the therapy to be effective, it would have to be enough to have a feeling. So with a sensation of the alteration induced by LSD. So threshold dose is approximately 13 micrograms, approximately 13, right? Above that, you start getting into what's known as sort of a museum level dose. You know, it's enhancing sensation. It's driving that bottom up sensation that we know via Carhart-Harris and Friston's rebus model. We know that we're trying to bias that bottom up sensory input and diminish or loosen top-down priors, right? So they surmised that if they used 50 micrograms, that would be enough for them to have the beneficial effects in terms of maybe weighting the bottom-up sensory processing, which is where a lot of what's surmised in the rebus model is where a lot of the error correction gets recalibrated, re-weighted. And yet higher than that they felt would be too involving in terms of the psychedelic mental, emotional, cognitive effects, right? And that turned out to be the case. But also as a direct result of this work, and this is crucial if we're talking about the resolution of something like phantom-limb pain or many types of chronic pain, they believed that the movement element in the therapy while under that neuroplastic window was crucial. And why is this the case? Because throughout the body, there's many types of receptors. But if you reference one of the earlier theories about how pain works, something known as the pain gating by Melzek and Wall, pain gate, right? There's this idea that you have, distributed throughout the body in very high density, say around very high density of nerve beds around the joints, because that's where the most motion happens. You have two kind of receptors that we're primarily concerned with in chronic pain: mechanoceptors and nociceptors, right? So those are very broad terms. There's many subtypes, but mechanoceptors sense movement, very important for proprioception, right? Your body's ongoing 3D map of itself. Where is it in terms of movement and position related to every other portion of the body, right? Ongoing self-refreshing 3D map. Nociception, detecting noxious or painful stimuli. High priority goes to mechanoception because it's crucial for moment-to-moment survival. And nociception is low priority until it passes a threshold or a gate, right? There's like this gating mechanism that's kind of holding nociception down at bay while the priority of mechanoception is driving. But once there's enough either intensity through frequency, or there's this idea of temporal summation and spatial summation. So spatial is lots of signals from many different places. Temporal is like one sensation, but it's coming at a high frequency. It gates or opens this gate where the pain signal then is getting highest priority, right? So anytime you have movement, that's generally gating that nociception. So if you think of a classic thing where you're hammering something into a wall and you accidentally smash your thumb with the hammer, there's actually this perceptual gap that occurs, right? It can occur where you hit it and there's this like, oh, here it comes, and then comes the pain, and then it's like and what's the first thing you start doing? You're shaking your thumb in an attempt to create more mechanoafference to dampen down that nociceptive afferent input that's coming in, right? Or you'll do other things like you'll hold it, so you're compressing it. That's baroception, another great thing to do. Blowing on it, sucking on it, or you put heat on it, you put cold on it. So there's thermoceptors. All of these are attempts to damp down that nociceptive output of the CNS. And here's a thing to keep in mind. So the common misconception about how pain works, because it's something you feel and it's intuitive, but this is an old model of how pain was thought to work. The thing to understand is that pain is not an input of sensation from the receptors out in the limbs and the bodies, but pain is an output of the CNS that is a perception, right? It's not a sensation, it's a perception. And that's crucial in that biopsychosocial model, right? So they correctly surmise that in order to resolve phantom limb pain while under this neuroplastic window induced by LSD, that movement would be a crucial aspect in order to resolve it. And we see this nowadays from how chronic pain is treated using multiple input stacks, either visual, vestibular, everything down through the body, various types of electrostim, vibration, all sorts of inputs, right? And Dr. Joel Castellanos references this pretty significantly in his review paper from May of 2020. UCSD is doing truly amazing things. But the fact is, this paper was released in 1962. It was republished in 1967 in an English version in the Lancet. And in the 1967 release in the Lancet, they actually reference back to the work of Kast in 1964 when he was dealing with cancer patients using 100 micrograms of LSD to deal with end-stage terminal cancer pain, right? But honestly, the recognition needs to go to this Japanese team. They started doing this work in 1958 in post-war Japan, and they published their results in 1962, and it's an incredible piece of work. I first discovered this back in between March and May of 2020. And then it's briefly mentioned, I believe, in the Castellanos paper. This was like post me going through the NYU psilocybin study for depression. I already had a background in chronic pain. And then the Castellanos paper very clearly also is discussing the Ramachandran Albert Lin psilocybin and mirror visual feedback therapy for phantom limb pain. Landmark pieces of work. But we have to recognize that the Japanese here, literally they got there first. Right, they got there first, and their their prescience is almost omniscient, in my opinion. In my opinion, right? They got the basic theory absolutely correct, and their results were pretty remarkable at the time. So the shame is that it wasn't continued. Right. The shame is that it wasn't continued, and phantom limb pain is honestly no joke or trivial at all. It's a kind of pain that's very demoralizing and all-consuming when it's going on. So this is a rich area of research, but just once again, Kuromaru and the entire team from Kobe and Kyoto, they deserve the recognition for this. So I'll put up some links. Prior to a month ago, this was hard to find online. You could not find this online, except for the MAPS bibliography publishing just a very brief multi-photocopied abstract, and only in the last month, I believe, did this come out on the MAPS bibliography. Thank you, MAPS. Thank you very much. It was referenced in many other studies, but you couldn't find it online. If you went to the Lancet website, couldn't find it there, right? Even if it was cited. So I was very fortunate that Joe Moore from Psychedelics Today helped me do a little bit of a deep dive and get access to the Lancet article. I was also independently able to get a hold of the original Japanese language publication of the study when it came out. So you can see right there what that looks like. And I tried to get it, translated online. Not so easy since it's medical. Obviously, Eric Kast deserves a huge bit of recognition just for really pushing the boundary forward in many ways. I discussed both of these works in REMAP Therapeutics seminar for chronic pain in the history section. So we discussed at length these contributions in terms of historical research as well as what's going on with modern research. In 2 weeks, we're going to be doing this seminar again, integrating neuromuscular rehabilitation with psychedelics and laying out what historical research and current research suggests as an evidence-informed approach to best practices for using psychedelics for resolving and treating chronic pain. I'll have a link down in the notes for signing up for that. But if you have any questions, please feel free to hit me up in the comments below. And thank you once again. This is REMAP Therapeutics.